Tonight we stroll through a gallery of human absurdity, a parade of rules so peculiar that they make modern bureaucracy look like a warm hug. These are the weirdest laws in history, not the usual don't steal bread type of rules, but the ones that make you wonder if the lawmakers were bored, drunk, or just trying to see how far they could push people before someone snapped. Imagine being fined for wearing the wrong shoes, or jailed for eating ice cream in public. Tonight, we'll wander through centuries of strange rules, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be grateful for the comparatively tame nonsense of modern times. I'm the Candlelight Historian, and this is history as it was lived, unforgiving, unfiltered, and brutally real. Now, relax, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a cobbled street that glistens with the soft sheen of rain, as though the past has just been washed and polished for our visit. There's a quiet mist hanging in the air, clinging to the rooftops, and the world feels slower, softer, as if time itself has decided to take a nap. Beside you, I'm your guide, walking at a pace that could almost lull you to sleep. Every footstep is measured, echoing faintly as we pass rows of wooden shop fronts and crooked chimneys. The past, as we step into it tonight, doesn't feel like a dusty museum. It's alive. You can smell it, the wood smoke, the damp stone, and that unmistakable mix of bread baking somewhere nearby, mingled with something less pleasant you hope not to identify. But even here, with the comfort of a warm loaf waiting, someone would have once been fined for baking it with too much spice. That's the kind of world we're walking through, a place where laws didn't just protect people, they controlled almost every detail of their lives, from what they wore to how they behaved at the dinner table. And the strangest part, most people didn't question it. They just went along with whatever rule was passed down, because challenging the system wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. Imagine a medieval town council sitting around a wooden table, all nodding seriously as one guy proposes that no man shall wear shoes with toes longer than 12 inches. And everyone agrees. Why? Because someone, somewhere, must have once tripped over their own footwear and caused an incident. We move forward through the centuries like ghosts, weaving between eras. Picture ancient Athens, where democracy was born. Yet there were laws so oddly specific that breaking them might feel like a comedy sketch. At one point, it was illegal for women to buy anything over a certain value without a male guardian's permission. Not because of economic policy, but because lawmakers apparently feared women might spend wildly on luxury goods. So, if you had a purse of coins and dreams of buying a new cloak, too bad. You feel the hum of this history around you, like the walls of time are leaning in with their secrets. We drift past scenes that make you raise an eyebrow. A Victorian gentleman fined for cycling too fast. A peasant arrested for wearing silk he couldn't possibly afford. Society, it seems, has always loved to create rules that blur the line between order and sheer absurdity. But let's stay here for a moment, right where we are, standing in the soft glow of a medieval street lantern, which, by the way, might have been a candle inside a protective cage, because actual street lamps weren't a thing yet. If you lived here, your entire day would be shaped by laws that you didn't choose. And not just the big laws about theft or violence, those make sense. We're talking about rules like who can wear the color purple. Spoiler, you probably can't. Purple was often reserved for royalty, as if anyone else wearing it might cause a dangerous outbreak of mistaken identity. It's funny, isn't it? We like to think of the past as wild and free, but the truth is, it was often suffocating with rules. If you want to throw a party, you might need permission. If you want to drink wine on a Tuesday, sorry, that's restricted to noblemen. Even feasts had rules about how many dishes could be served and in what order. And heaven forbid you tried to sneak in an extra pudding. We stroll past a market square now, its stalls lit by the flicker of oil lamps. The air smells of damp herbs and wood smoke. with a sharp edge of leather from a nearby tanner's workshop. Imagine this scene alive with people, all bound by invisible threads of laws they've memorized since childhood. A boy selling bread must mind his manners, because insulting a customer could land him in trouble. A woman buying fabric might be questioned if her purchase looks too fancy. Even the butcher has to follow weight laws so strict that cheating on the scales could earn him a public shaming. Or worse, a fine he couldn't possibly pay. As we walk, you might notice how quiet the night feels. No one is arguing or shouting. And it's not because life is peaceful. It's because causing a disturbance could be illegal. In some towns, it was against the law to make too much noise at night, sing a song too loudly, or whistle at the wrong hour, and you could find yourself paying a fine or spending a very boring evening in the local stocks. The more we explore, the clearer it becomes that humans have always been a little bit obsessed with control. Whether it's banning certain foods, certain fabrics, or certain ways of having fun, laws have often been a reflection of the fears and insecurities of the people who made them. Afraid of social climbing, ban commoners from wearing velvet. Nervous about losing face, fine anyone who dares to mock your royal portrait. We pause at the edge of a darkened alley, the kind that smells faintly of wet wood and leftover ale. In the distance, you can hear the faint creak of wooden shutters. Somewhere, a dog barks once and falls silent. It's easy to imagine a night watchman passing by, carrying a lantern and muttering to himself about curfew laws. And yes, there were curfew bells, literal bells, that told people when they had to be inside or risk punishment. Forget nightlife. If you were out too late, you weren't just frowned at, you were breaking the law. It's strange how many of these old laws feel like overprotective parenting, isn't it? Society saying, no, you can't wear that, or you can't stay up late. It's as though entire governments once dedicated themselves to being the strict headmaster of everyone's life. Yet, in their own odd way, these rules kept order. They made sense to the people living under them. And tonight, we'll dive headfirst into these absurdities. From ridiculous taxes to clothing regulations that would make modern fashion police seem chill by comparison. As we take a slow step forward, the mist curls around us like it's listening in. It knows we're about to dig deeper into this world of bizarre laws. The next stop is a time when even your hat could get you in trouble. Imagine walking into a marketplace, adjusting your cap, only to be told that your choice of headwear is technically illegal. Not because it's offensive, or because it has some dangerous feature, but simply because it looks too nice for someone of your social class. Welcome to the realm of sumptuary laws, where lawmakers thought regulating hats, shoes, and fabrics was the key to a well-ordered society. The air here smells faintly of wool and smoke. We pass a row of small houses, each with thin trails of chimney smoke curling into the night. Through one open door, you glimpse a family crowded around a dim fire. Their clothes rough and practical, brown wool and coarse linen. No one here is daring enough to break the rules, not unless they want a fine that would cost them more than a month's wages. A single feather stuck in a hat might cost as much as a cow if the wrong official notices it. As we walk through this narrow lane, it's easy to see how ridiculous these rules must have felt. The height of your hat could signify how important you were. The taller the hat, the higher your social standing. Of course, this meant that peasants couldn't just wear tall hats and pretend to be nobles. That would be scandalous. So there were laws for that. A cobbler or farmer with a towering hat would be fined or forced to remove it, because heaven forbid anyone mistake a barley farmer for a knight. We turn into the market square, and you can almost hear the chatter, merchants calling out prices, the sound of coins clinking, and someone shouting about a fresh catch of fish. Everyone is watching what everyone else is wearing. This isn't just fashion envy, it's survival. If your hat brim is wider than it's supposed to be, you could be dragged in front of a magistrate. It's strange, isn't it? How much a piece of cloth can say about a person. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, hats were more than protection from rain. They were silent billboards announcing your class. The wealthy wore hats made of velvet or felted wool, sometimes with gold stitching or exotic feathers. The poor had plain caps made from scratchy linen, and if anyone from the lower classes dared to wear something fancier, they risked being accused of pretending to be higher class. We pass by a stall where a tailor is sewing under the candlelight. His fingers move quickly, stitching a simple bonnet that will likely be sewed by sunrise. He gives us a knowing glance, as if to say, "Don't ask me to make anything fancy for you. The laws won't allow it." This isn't paranoia. There were entire lists of forbidden materials for different classes. Fur, silk, or embroidered hats might as well have been locked away in a noble's chest, far from the reach of common folk. Of course, some people still tried to cheat. Humans have always had a rebellious streak. Imagine a bold farmer sneaking a colorful ribbon onto his hat, or a tradesman trying out a taller brim when he thinks no one's looking. But the local officials were sharp-eyed, and they loved catching rule breakers. Not because they cared about fashion, but because fines were an easy way to collect money. A single hat-related offense might cost a peasant the equivalent of weeks of labor. We pause by a tavern now, its doorway glowing with warm firelight. Inside, men sit around wooden tables, tankards in hand. Some wear hats even indoors, a bold move considering the risk of drawing attention. You can almost hear their low conversations, half complaints about taxes, half jokes about who got fined last week for having a hat feather that was too majestic. It's hard not to smile at the idea of a feather causing such outrage. There's a certain irony in all this. The laws were meant to keep society orderly and maintain the illusion of hierarchy, but what they really did was make everyone hyper-aware of appearances. It was a game of spot the hat crime, and no one wanted to lose. As we wander past the tavern, the smell of roasting meat drifts out into the cool air. It mixes with the scent of damp earth and smoke from nearby hearths. The streets are mostly empty now, but you can picture this place by day, bustling with color, each hat bobbing like a little flag of social standing. Nobles in tall, fine hats, walking proudly past shopkeepers, in short, humble caps. Everyone locked into their assigned visual category, like pieces on a chessboard. But not all hat laws were about class. Some were about practicality, or at least, what rulers thought was practical. In England, for a time, it was required by law that men wear a wool cap on Sundays, except for noblemen. The idea was to boost the wool trade, but you can imagine how ridiculous it must have looked. A sea of men all wearing nearly identical caps, because failing to do so meant a fine. If you forgot your Sunday hat, you might as well just throw some coins at the nearest guard and go home in shame. We stopped near a quiet fountain, the water trickling softly in the background. It's peaceful here, but the laws of the past still hum in the air. You can feel the tension, the silent pressure of looking right, of being careful not to appear too wealthy or too poor. Hats, shoes, even the colors of your clothing were dictated by someone far above your pay grade. Someone who probably never had to worry about being fined for a feather. And yet, despite all this, life went on. People found ways to express themselves in tiny details, the way they tilted their hats, or how they stitched a subtle pattern into a plain fabric. It's a reminder that even under the strictest rules, humans always find room for individuality. The mist feels warmer now as we wander into a part of history where fruit was a symbol of power, wealth, and, occasionally, scandal. Imagine this. You're strolling through a marketplace, and someone casually sets down a pineapple. The crowd gasps as though someone just placed a crown jewel on the table. Pineapples weren't just fruit. They were social standing symbols so prized that laws, taxes, and even fines grew around them like vines. We step into a 17th century European street. The cobbles beneath your feet are uneven and still damp from an earlier rain. The smell of bread mingles with smoke from a nearby baker's oven, but it's the fruit stalls that draw your eye. Most of them display humble goods: apples, pears, maybe a few dried figs if you're lucky. Then, at the end of the row, stands a merchant under a striped canopy, carefully polishing the spiny surface of a single pineapple like it's a relic from another world. Which, in a way, it is. This particular fruit, hauled across oceans, is so rare and expensive that it isn't even for eating. It's for renting. That's right. In 18th century England, people could rent a pineapple just to display it at parties. You wouldn't dare slice into it. Instead, you'd show it off like a trophy and hand it back when the night was over. A pineapple could cost as much as a carriage, and if you damaged it, you might find yourself paying more than your entire annual wage. As we move past the merchant's stall, you can almost feel the tension. There's a guard nearby, not because the market is dangerous, but because this pineapple is basically under royal protection. The laws about exotic fruit were strict. Import taxes were outrageous, partly to keep these luxuries out of the hands of anyone but the elite. Imagine getting fined for simply buying something too nice. A bit like a modern cop pulling you over because your car looks too fancy for your tax bracket. We slip into a quieter alley now, leaving the chatter of the market behind. The ground here is littered with orange peels. Yes, even oranges were once an expensive import. You can almost picture a wealthy host peeling an orange in front of guests, as if to say, "Look at me, casually destroying something you'll never afford." The scent of citrus still lingers faintly, sharp and clean against the damp air. In some places, fruit taxes became so absurd that smuggling was a full-time career. Ships would sneak bananas and pineapples into port at night, hoping to dodge inspectors. You might imagine smugglers running through the shadows, arms full of pineapples, like some bizarre fruit-based heist movie. And while pineapples were the stars of the show, other fruits were caught in the net of overregulation. In colonial America, there were laws about trading melons and apples across certain state lines without permits. Why? Partly to control prices, but also because officials just loved the paperwork. Nothing says power like the ability to dictate who gets to bite into a piece of fruit. We pause under the overhang of a wooden balcony, the rain dripping in soft, rhythmic beats. From here, you can see the house of a wealthy merchant, its windows glowing faintly with candlelight. Inside, there's probably a pineapple displayed on a table, surrounded by silver dishes and polished cups. It's not there to be eaten, it's there to be admired, like a sculpture. And if you were to touch it without permission, you'd likely be thrown out, or fined. Even today, traces of these laws linger in strange ways. Think about how we still associate certain foods with luxury. But back then, this obsession with fruit was on a completely different level. There were even stories of pineapples being locked in glass cases at events, guarded like rare jewels, while guests whispered about the host's incredible wealth. The funniest part: pineapples don't last long. After a week, that expensive centerpiece would start to rot. Yet, instead of just slicing it up and enjoying it, many people would let it decay gracefully because the appearance of wealth mattered more than the actual taste. As we walk on, the street narrows again, the smell of the market fading behind us. You can feel how fragile this world was, a place where social standing could hinge on something as simple as displaying the right piece of fruit. It's almost comical, yet deeply human. We've always loved showing off, and in centuries past, the pineapple was basically Instagram in edible form. A light drizzle begins to fall, dampening your hair and softening the sounds of the night. The glow from the market stalls fades into the mist, and you can hear the distant clatter of a carriage on stone. We move forward, heading toward another era, where the laws didn't just govern what you could eat or wear, they even cared about what grew on your face. The drizzle lingers as we step into a world where the shape of your face, or more precisely, what's growing on it, could cost you a small fortune. Beards, those harmless collections of hair, have been admired, banned, taxed, and even treated like political statements throughout history. Tonight, we find ourselves wandering through centuries when a man's facial hair wasn't just a style choice. It was practically a financial liability. The first sound you hear in this new place is the steady clink of coins. We're in 16th century Russia under the reign of Tsar Peter the Great, a man who decided that beards were holding the country back. Not in a metaphorical sense. He literally believed that facial hair made Russia seem outdated compared to the clean-shaven men of Western Europe. And Peter, being Peter, wasn't about to let personal grooming remain a personal decision. He introduced a beard tax, forcing every man who wanted to keep his whiskers to pay up or face the razor. We walk through the streets of Moscow, and the cold bites at your cheeks, a reminder of why beards existed in the first place. A man in a heavy fur coat passes by, his face covered with a thick beard, and you notice a small, shiny token hanging from his neck. This isn't jewelry, it's his beard license, proof that he's paid the tax for the privilege of keeping his chin warm. Without it, he could be stopped by officials and forcibly shaved in public. Imagine the humiliation. You're minding your business, just trying to look respectable with your beard, and suddenly you're tackled by someone with a blade who informs you that your face is now property of the state. People paid dearly to avoid this. The rich could afford the tax, but for poorer men, it was either pay up or lose your facial hair altogether. We pass a tavern, its warm glow spilling onto the snow-dusted street. Inside, a few men sit nursing mugs of mead, each one stroking his beard nervously as if it might be snatched away at any moment. You can almost hear their muttered conversations, complaints about the cost of keeping a beard, jokes about friends who tried to avoid paying and ended up clean-shaven against their will. It's both funny and a little sad, how something as natural as hair could become a government revenue stream. But Russia wasn't alone in its obsession with facial hair. In Tudor England, Queen Elizabeth I had her own take on beard taxation. If your beard grew past a certain length, you had to pay a tax every few weeks. It was like renting space on your own face. And while the English law wasn't as brutally enforced as Peter's, it still meant that only the wealthy could afford luxurious beards. We walk past a church now, its stone steps slick with frost. A priest is sweeping snow from the entryway, his face clean-shaven, not because he wants to be, but because even the church couldn't escape these rules. Some clergy paid the tax in silence, while others simply took the blade to their beards to avoid the hassle. Imagine attending confession, and the priest looks more concerned about his next beard bill than your sins. The air grows colder as we turn down another street, the sound of boots crunching on ice beneath us. Beards have always carried meaning. They were symbols of wisdom, masculinity, rebellion. But when rulers saw them as a threat or a source of income, they became controversial overnight. You can almost picture Peter the Great, scissors in hand, marching through a crowd, personally trimming anyone who didn't comply. In fact, there are stories of him doing exactly that, ambushing men and cutting off their beards on the spot. The thought makes you smile. There's something both terrifying and ridiculous about the idea of a ruler so obsessed with appearances that he'd treat a beard like contraband. And yet, we still see echoes of this today. Dress codes, grooming standards, all those subtle rules about how you should look. They're distant cousins of these historical beard laws. We stop near a frozen fountain, its surface glinting under the pale moonlight. You can see the reflection of the street around us, flickering candles in windows, a stray cat padding silently through the snow. The world is quiet, but you can almost sense the tension of those days. Every man had to decide, keep the beard and pay the price, or give it up and look like everyone else. And here's the thing, some people refused to give in. There were rebels who proudly wore their beards without paying, daring officials to do something about it. These men were often admired, even if they ended up with a lighter wallet or a freshly shaved chin. Their beards became more than hair. They were tiny acts of defiance. We turn a corner now, leaving the icy streets of Moscow behind. The air shifts, growing warmer, the sound of coins fading as we step toward another era. Ahead lies a world where the laws aren't about hair or hats, but about something even stranger, the dead. You might not expect it, but there were actual laws once created for the dead, or rather to make sure they stayed that way. Welcome to medieval Europe, where fear of the walking dead wasn't just folklore whispered around campfires. It was written into official records, carved into legal codes, and, occasionally, hammered into coffins with a wooden stake. We find ourselves standing at the edge of a small village graveyard. The ground is uneven, dotted with lopsided wooden crosses and weathered stone markers that lean like tired old men. A cold breeze stirs the bare branches overhead, and you can almost hear the faint creak of wood as though the graves themselves are sighing in the dark. People here don't just bury their dead. They bury them twice, once with soil and once with law. In the 12th and 13th centuries, there was a strange and persistent fear that corpses might rise from the ground. These weren't the zombies you see in movies, no rotting hordes or brain cravings, but the belief was real enough that revenants, as they called them, were considered dangerous spirits or restless bodies. Villagers believed the dead could climb out of their graves and cause illness, ruin crops, or haunt the living. And the solution? Write laws to stop them, of course. We walk down a narrow path between the graves. The smell of damp earth clings to the air, mixed with wood smoke drifting from nearby cottages. You imagine a villager, years ago, trudging through this graveyard with a torch, checking to make sure no one had stirred. It sounds ridiculous now, but to them it was deadly serious. There were even legal procedures for handling a suspected walking corpse. One law allowed for the exhumation and reburial of bodies, often with extreme measures. A body might be dug up, beheaded, or pinned to the earth with an iron rod, all perfectly legal, all approved by local authorities. The most chilling part, these laws weren't just obscure village traditions. They appeared in church decrees and royal orders. If a village believed a recently buried person was causing sickness, officials could step in and order a trial of the corpse. Yes, a literal trial. The body would be examined for signs of decay, or, bizarrely, for signs it had been moving. It was a strange combination of fear and formality, like a courtroom drama where the defendant couldn't object because they were dead. We pause by a grave with an old wooden lid slightly ajar, its edges softened by centuries of rain. You imagine the paranoia that led to this. In a world without science to explain disease, people blamed what they could see or imagine, and the dead were an easy target. Entire communities might gather to watch a body being exhumed, each person clutching a candle as priests muttered Latin prayers to keep the soul in its place. But the oddest laws weren't just about what to do if the dead rose. Some laws tried to prevent it entirely by dictating how graves were built. In certain towns, it was required that heavy stones be placed on top of coffins, or that graves be dug extra deep. In Eastern Europe, iron spikes or sickles were sometimes buried with the body to trap any evil spirit that might try to escape. It's hard not to smile at the thought. Medieval lawmakers essentially saying, yes, this heavy rock will definitely stop the dead from walking around. The wind picks up as we step closer to the churchyard gate. It creaks on its hinges, the sound sharp in the quiet night. Beyond the fence, the village streets glow faintly with torchlight, and you can picture the anxious faces of those who once lived here. Every cough or sudden illness might have been blamed on a restless corpse. The laws gave people a strange sense of control. If you followed the right burial customs, maybe your dead neighbor wouldn't come knocking. As absurd as it all sounds, these laws tell us something important. Fear shapes rules. Just as modern laws are built on what we fear today, theft, fraud, disorder, medieval laws were built on fear of the unknown. And nothing was more unknown than death. We leave the graveyard now, the sound of our steps soft against the damp earth. The air feels lighter as we head toward the village center, but the stories of the dead follow us like whispers. The fear of revenants may seem silly, but even now, we still love ghost stories. We still imagine the dead watching us. The only difference is that we no longer write entire legal codes to keep them at bay. Ahead, there's a warm glow spilling from a wooden inn. The laughter and clatter of mugs, a welcome change from the silence of the graveyard. We step closer, and the smell of food drifts toward us. Bread, broth, and maybe some roast meat. But even here, the past finds a way to be strange. In some eras, laws even dictated what you could eat, how much, and when. And if you thought pineapples were absurd, wait until you hear about dinner table crimes. The inn's warmth greets us like a blanket as we step inside. But the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread comes with a reminder. This, too, could once have been regulated. Imagine sitting down at a table after a long day, reaching for a second slice of bread, and suddenly realizing you've just committed a crime. Welcome to the world of historical food laws, where eating the wrong thing, or simply eating too much, could land you in trouble. The inn is buzzing. Wooden tables are packed with travelers, their cloaks dripping rain onto the floor. The fire crackles in a great stone hearth, smoke curling into the rafters and making the air thick with the smell of burning oak. A man with a red beard leans across his bench, tearing into a loaf of bread as though it might disappear. His companion gives him a wary glance, and you can almost hear the unspoken question, is that allowed? In medieval and early modern Europe, food wasn't just nourishment. It was reputation, wealth, and a display of your place in the social ladder. Kings and nobles dined on banquets of venison, swans, and rare spices. Meanwhile, peasants ate whatever they could, mostly coarse bread, thin stews, and vegetables grown in rocky soil. And the law loved to remind everyone to stay in their place. There were actual regulations on what people of different classes were allowed to eat. Certain meats and fish were reserved exclusively for the upper classes. Want to roast a deer? If you were a farmer, that could get you fined or even thrown in jail. We settle at a corner table, out of the way, and watch as the innkeeper ladles soup into bowls. He moves with the practiced efficiency of someone who knows his portions well, because serving too much food could also be a problem. In some towns, bakers and innkeepers were required by law to measure and weigh everything they served. Give a customer too little bread, and you could be fined. Give them too much, and you could be accused of cheating the economy by lowering prices unfairly. It was a no-win situation. Perhaps the strangest laws, though, were the ones that dictated when and how you could eat. For example, during Lent or on certain holy days, eating meat was strictly forbidden for most people. Breaking that rule wasn't just a sin, it was a punishable offense. You can picture a hungry worker sneaking a piece of ham behind a barn and hoping no one sees. Because if the wrong person caught him, he'd be forced to pay a fine, do penance, or worse, face public shaming. We glance over at the long table in the center of the room, where a group of merchants are eating what looks like roasted goose, tearing off pieces with their hands and dipping them into a dish of salt. The scene is warm and noisy, but it also feels like a performance. In those days, how you behaved at the table was just as important as what you ate. Laws and etiquette manuals dictated everything from how you cut your meat to which foods you could mix. Slurp your soup or take too big a bite, and someone might accuse you of disorderly behavior. It wasn't just bad manners, it could get you fined. It sounds absurd now, but consider this. Food was power. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, or saffron were so rare and expensive that using them carelessly was almost a crime against the economy. There were even laws that tried to prevent people from showing off by overspicing their meals. Imagine a modern dinner party where the host gets arrested for using too much paprika. That's the kind of world we're talking about. The innkeeper stops at our table and sets down a plate of bread, still warm from the oven. The crust is dark and slightly cracked, the scent of baked wheat filling the room. This, at least, is safe. Bread was the foundation of life in much of Europe, and there were stricter size of bread laws to control its price and quality. Bakers who cheated customers by making loaves too small or too light could be dragged into the marketplace, tied to a cart, and pelted with stale bread as punishment. It's both poetic and petty, exactly the kind of thing history is full of. We take a slow look around the room. There's a man at the far end eating quietly, his plate filled with what looks like roasted rabbit. A few centuries ago, he might have needed special permission just to eat that. Game laws were designed to keep peasants from hunting animals reserved for the nobility. In some places, even fishing in certain rivers was illegal for commoners. Break those rules, and you weren't just stealing dinner, you were committing a crime against the crown. It's funny how much fear surrounded food. People worried about famine, disease, and scarcity, but they also had to worry about eating the wrong thing at the wrong time. It's no wonder that feasts were such big deals. They weren't just meals. They were carefully orchestrated displays of wealth and legality. As the noise of the inn fades behind us, we step outside once more. The rain has stopped, and the night is quiet except for the occasional drip of water from the eaves. You feel the cool air on your face, crisp and refreshing after the smoky heat of the inn. Ahead lies another curiosity. If hats and food could be regulated, what about shoes? Believe it or not, the shoes on your feet could once get you fined, mocked, or even arrested. And some of those laws were as ridiculous as a chicken trying to play the lute. The rain-soaked road stretches ahead as we leave behind the warm glow of the inn, stepping into a time when even your shoes were not entirely your own choice. Footwear, that simple barrier between skin and earth, was once the subject of surprisingly strict laws. You might think of shoes as fashion or comfort, but in centuries past, they were also markers of social standing, and the law kept a close eye on who could wear what. We're now walking through a medieval town square, its cobblestones slick with puddles that reflect the faint glimmer of torchlight. The air smells faintly of damp leather, thanks to a row of cobblers' workshops nearby. A man with ink-stained fingers steps out of one, holding up a freshly made pair of boots. They're soft leather, sturdy and practical, but not too decorative. Why? Because making shoes too fancy for certain customers could have landed him in trouble. You might laugh, but the rules were precise. In England and France, during the Middle Ages, sumptuary laws dictated that peasants couldn't wear shoes made of fine leather or adorned with bright dyes. Those privileges were reserved for the wealthy, or more accurately, for the wealthy who could afford the fines that came with breaking such rules. Even toe length was regulated. There were strict limits on how long those points could be, depending on your class. A nobleman might strut around with shoes so long they required chains to keep them from flopping around, while a commoner's shoes were expected to be short and plain. We pass a merchant who's pulling on a pair of boots with slightly pointed toes. glancing nervously over his shoulder. There were strict limits on how long those points could be, depending on your class. A nobleman might strut around with shoes so long they required chains to keep them from flopping around, while a commoner's shoes were expected to be short and plain. We pass a merchant who's pulling on a pair of boots with slightly pointed toes, glancing nervously over his shoulder. He's probably wondering if his toes are legal length. A local official, dressed in dark robes, walks past us with a scroll tucked under his arm, as though ready to measure the tip of anyone's shoe. The scene is both absurd and oddly tense. Fashion, after all, was serious business when it was tied to social order. The cobblers in their shops aren't just artisans. They're almost like diplomats, balancing style with law. Too much flair on a boot for a commoner, and they might get fined. Too little, and the customer complains. We peek inside one of the workshops, where a candle burns low, illuminating shelves stacked with shoes of every size. The air smells of tanned hides and warm wax. A young apprentice sits by the fire, hammering nails into a pair of soles. He glances up at us with tired eyes, as if to say, "Please don't ask me to make illegal footwear tonight." What makes these laws so fascinating is how seriously they were enforced. There are records of people being fined for daring to wear footwear considered too noble. And this wasn't just about vanity. The authorities believed that clothing and accessories, shoes included, had to reflect your position in life. A cobbler wearing shoes as fine as a lord's was seen as dangerously ambitious, like a peasant trying to crash a royal banquet. We stroll further down the square, passing a man selling second-hand shoes. His stall is covered in mismatched pairs, some with scuffed soles, others with brightly colored laces that have clearly been toned down to avoid trouble. He eyes us cautiously, perhaps worried we're here to inspect his wares for illegal styles. You can almost imagine him whispering, "These laces are totally legal, I swear," while tucking away anything too flashy. Of course, some people still pushed the boundaries. If you were wealthy enough, you could simply pay the fines and wear what you wanted. There are stories of nobles wearing poulaines so absurdly long they had to tie the tips to their knees just to walk properly. Picture someone clumsily navigating a muddy street, shoes bending like wilted flowers, just to show off their social standing. It's both hilarious and a little tragic. The sky above the square is dark now, dotted with faint stars. A group of travelers huddles near a fire pit, warming their damp shoes. One of them is telling a story about a man who was fined for wearing red boots. Apparently, the boots were too regal for a farmer, and the local lord took offense. You can almost see the frustration in their faces. Imagine being told that even the color on your feet is too ambitious. We leave the square and head down a narrow lane. The air is quieter here, the smell of leather fading into the damp, earthy scent of the night. It's strange, but the more we learn about these old laws, the more they reveal about the past. Shoes weren't just about walking, they were about walking in your place. And heaven help you if you tried to take a step too high. Ahead, the road widens, leading toward another marketplace. This one is smaller, quieter, and oddly modern in its absurdity. Here, the laws are still ridiculous, but they feel almost playful compared to medieval shoe policing. We're heading into a world where ice cream cones are banned from pockets and Sundays come with desert restrictions. Yes, really. The air here is warmer, humming with the faint scent of vanilla and sugar. Street lamps glow softly, casting golden pools of light on the cobbled road ahead. A small cart rattles by, the vendor calling out to bystanders about fresh ice cream. But there's a catch, depending on where we are in history. Even something as innocent as ice cream could be a legal minefield. We find ourselves in the United States during the early 20th century, a time when lawmakers apparently had nothing better to do than regulate desserts. Imagine this. You're strolling through town, minding your own business, with a cone of vanilla ice cream in your pocket. Why it's in your pocket, no one knows. Maybe your hands are full. Maybe you just made a questionable life choice. But suddenly, you're breaking the law. In several American states, there were actual laws prohibiting walking around with an ice cream cone in your pocket. No one is entirely sure why this law existed, but one theory involves horse theft. Supposedly, clever thieves would place ice cream in their pockets to lure horses away without technically stealing them, because the horses would follow the scent. As bizarre as that sounds, someone must have taken it seriously enough to write it down. You can picture a sheriff squinting at a confused man with a melted cone in his coat, saying, "Sorry son, that's a $5 fine." We pass a brightly lit ice cream parlor, the windows fogged from warmth inside. Through the glass, you can see families sitting on wooden stools, enjoying scoops piled high with sprinkles. It's cheerful and cozy, but if it's Sunday, trouble might be brewing. In some states, it was illegal to sell ice cream on Sundays, part of a larger set of blue laws meant to enforce religious rest days. Imagine craving a sundae, only to find every ice cream shop closed by order of the law. That's not just inconvenient, it's borderline cruel. We wander past the parlor, the street growing quieter. The smell of waffle cones lingers in the air, warm and sweet. There's something oddly funny about these laws, as if someone, somewhere, woke up one morning and decided that dessert had gone too far. And ice cream isn't the only victim of weird dessert rules. At one point, in Kansas, pie was legally required to be cut in a certain way to ensure fair portions. Can you imagine getting a ticket because your slice of apple pie was just a little too generous? Further down the road, we pass a small park where children are playing, their laughter carrying through the evening air. The sight of them running around with ice cream dripping down their hands makes you think of how different life is now. Back then, a kid with an ice cream cone in his pocket would have been seen as some kind of criminal mastermind. We pause by a bench, the wooden slats cool beneath your hands. These odd desert laws tell a bigger story. They reflect a time when lawmakers were obsessed with controlling public behavior, sometimes for moral reasons, sometimes just for the sake of order. Ice cream, pie, even candy, all of them became symbols of indulgence, and indulgence had to be regulated. But desert wasn't the only thing that came with strange animal-related loopholes. In some places, laws were less about sweets and more about the creatures around you. The path bends toward a quieter part of town, where the sound of rushing water blends with the faint quacks of ducks somewhere nearby. Yes, ducks. The unassuming creatures that, at various points in history, found themselves at the center of actual legal discussions. It sounds like a joke, but there were once laws and ordinances about how, when, and even if ducks could cross a road. And, as we're about to see, the animal kingdom didn't escape the grasp of strange human rules. We stroll along the edge of a village pond, the surface shimmering under the pale moonlight. A group of ducks glides by, their movements creating ripples that distort the reflection of the stars. You can almost picture a medieval official standing here centuries ago, solemnly deciding that these ducks needed regulations. In some towns, it was illegal to interfere with ducks during their daily crossings, with fines for anyone who dared to hinder or harm them. Picture someone stopping mid-road, frozen in place, waiting for a parade of ducks to waddle by while a stern guard looks on, nodding in approval. But ducks weren't the only animals caught up in odd laws. There's a famous legend from medieval France about a pig that was actually put on trial for murder. Yes, a trial, complete with judges, witnesses, and sentencing. The pig was accused of killing a child, and rather than simply butcher it, which would have been the practical choice, the town authorities decided to stage a legal proceeding. The pig was dressed in a suit of clothes, brought into court, and ultimately convicted. It's both horrifying and absurd, a reminder that humans have always had a strange need to treat the animal world like it operates by human rules. We wander past the pond, heading toward a small wooden bridge. The boards creak softly underfoot, and the faint sound of quacking grows distant. Here, under the moonlight, the stories of animal laws feel even more surreal. In England, at various times, cats were taxed for the number of mice they caught. Imagine having to declare your cat's rodent-catching skills on some sort of medieval tax form. Or worse, imagine trying to argue that your cat is lazy and shouldn't be fined for underperformance. Then there's the tale of roosters. In certain European towns, laws dictated when roosters could crow, particularly if they lived near churches or noble estates. A rooster with bad timing, crowing too early or too loudly, could be confiscated or punished. You can picture the absurdity of a rooster in time out, or a farmer nervously telling his bird to please, just wait until dawn this time. We stop near a row of houses, their shutters closed against the night. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then falls silent. Dogs, too, had their share of legal entanglements. In ancient Rome, for instance, dogs were required to wear protection charms to prevent rabies outbreaks. If a dog bit someone and didn't have the proper amulet, the owner could face punishment. It's as though humans thought the dog's jewelry would magically prevent disease. And who knows, maybe they believed it worked. But perhaps the most charmingly odd animal laws involved working creatures. In 19th century America, there were towns where donkeys and mules were legally required to wear pants. Yes, actual pants, if they were paraded through the streets. Why? Mostly to maintain public decency. Nothing ruins a small-town parade like a scandalous mule, apparently. We move away from the bridge, the night growing quieter. There's something strangely endearing about all this. These laws, as bizarre as they seem, often came from a mix of superstition, practicality, and a desire for order. Animals were part of daily life. They pulled carts, guarded homes, and provided food, so people gave them the same scrutiny they gave everything else. Even ducks, just minding their business, became subjects of legal concern. The cobbled road ahead is empty now, except for the glisten of puddles under the starlight. As we walk, the air grows warmer, and the faint sound of a bell drifts toward us. It's a reminder of another kind of law, one not about animals or shoes, but about silence and rest. A time when disturbing someone's nap wasn't just rude, it was a punishable offense. And if that someone happened to be a king, well, you'd better hope you liked the sound of dungeon doors. Ahead, a tall stone wall rises, its surface covered with ivy and shadows. Beyond it lies a royal palace, where the air itself seems to hold its breath. Here, even the faintest noise could be considered a crime. Imagine living in a place where waking someone, especially someone royal, could lead to a punishment harsher than anything you'd expect for such a small offense. The faint clang of a distant bell echoes as we pass through the grand gates. The guards, dressed in ornate armor, polished to a dull silver sheen, stand at attention. Their eyes follow us like hawks, but they remain silent. Silence is everything here. This is a place where kings, queens, and noble lords rest undisturbed, and the laws ensure that their sleep is treated with near religious reverence. There were times when waking the king could mean immediate arrest, a hefty fine, or worse, a public flogging. The notion sounds absurd, doesn't it? Someone is sleeping, you accidentally drop a bucket, and suddenly you're a criminal. But in the Middle Ages and even later, royalty was treated as almost divine. To disturb their sleep wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a sign of disrespect or, in extreme cases, treason. A courtier who barged in during the wrong moment could be punished as though they had plotted against the crown itself. We make our way into the courtyard, where a fountain trickles quietly in the moonlight. You can almost feel the weight of silence pressing down here. Every servant, every guard, moves as though the walls have ears, and maybe they do. Stories abound of palace staff whispering in hushed tones, or even communicating through gestures after nightfall to avoid being accused of noise crimes. Inside, the corridors of the palace are lined with tapestries, not just for decoration, but for soundproofing. The thick fabric muffles every step, every scrape of a chair. You can smell the faint mix of beeswax polish and smoke from candles burning in elaborate sconces. It's all designed to create an environment of perfect quiet. Somewhere, a nobleman is likely dozing under heavy velvet curtains, safe from the sound of the outside world and from anyone foolish enough to disturb him. And it wasn't just royalty. In certain cultures, disturbing the sleep of the wealthy or powerful could have consequences. In 17th century France, for instance, disturbing someone's rest hours could be grounds for legal disputes. A neighbor playing music too loudly at the wrong time might find themselves facing fines. Imagine living in an age where the wrong bedtime tune could result in a court summons. We slip down a narrow hallway, our footsteps barely audible on the polished wooden floor. You can imagine how terrifying it must have been to live under these rules, knowing that a simple accident could be seen as an act of defiance. Even the palace cats, curling lazily by the fire, seem to understand the unspoken law of silence. There's a quiet humor to it all, though. Picture a guard standing outside the king's bedroom, holding his breath because a sneeze might get him reprimanded, or a servant creeping through the halls with a tray of food, each step slower than the last, praying that no clattering fork will wake anyone. The pressure must have been intense. One loud hiccup, and you might be sleeping in the dungeon by nightfall. But these laws weren't just about sleep. They were about power. Silence symbolized control. When a king slept, the entire palace, sometimes even the entire city, was expected to slow down. It was a way of reinforcing the idea that royalty was untouchable, living on a different plane from ordinary mortals. You didn't just respect the king's time, you respected his naps. We exit the palace now, stepping back into the cool night air. The ivy-covered walls stand tall and imposing behind us, and the quiet feels even deeper out here. A single owl hoots in the distance, breaking the silence for just a moment before the night settles again. As we move down the road, the idea of being punished for laughter or noise feels absurd, but as we'll soon see, it wasn't limited to sleep. There were times when smiling, dancing, or even laughing in public could be a crime. Yes, there were places where joy itself was suspicious. Imagine walking through your town with a smile on your face, only to be stopped and questioned as if happiness were evidence of some terrible plot. It sounds ridiculous, but there were places and times when laughter, dancing, and even smiling were restricted by law. These weren't rules born out of humorlessness alone. They were attempts to control behavior, morality, and even the spirit of a community. We find ourselves in 17th century England during the rise of Puritanism, a time when merrymaking was considered almost sinful. Streets here are narrow and quiet. The houses are tall, their dark timber frames leaning toward each other as though whispering secrets. The air smells faintly of smoke and damp wood, with the lingering scent of freshly extinguished candles. People pass us without making eye contact, their faces pale and serious, as if smiling might somehow bring divine wrath. In certain towns, public festivities, dancing, singing, even games, were outright banned. The Puritans believed that too much fun would lead to moral corruption, so they made joy illegal. Imagine being fined for laughing at a joke, or for humming a tune while walking to the market. It's as if the entire world was running on low volume, stripped of color and sound. Even Christmas celebrations were suppressed. Feasting, caroling, and decorations were frowned upon, and laws were passed to enforce this somber approach to life. We wander through a market square now, and you can feel the tension. Merchants stand behind their stalls, quietly selling bread and salted fish. No one calls out or haggles loudly. Even that could be considered improper. There's a faint drizzle in the air, and the ground is slick beneath our feet. A man drops a basket of apples, and for a brief moment, someone chuckles. The silence that follows is sharp. A guard turns his head, eyes narrowing, and the laughter dies instantly. It's unsettling how quickly the warmth of human expression is extinguished here. But England wasn't alone in its crusade against happiness. In 19th century Switzerland, there were cantons with laws forbidding loud laughter or music on Sundays. The idea was to keep the Sabbath holy and quiet, but the enforcement was sometimes overzealous. Picture a family sitting around their table, whispering jokes to each other and giggling into their hands, terrified of being overheard. It's a strange, almost comedic image, people sneaking happiness like contraband. We step into a narrow alley where the smell of coal smoke lingers. Somewhere above, laundry flaps in the damp breeze. It's strange to think how laws like these shaped daily life. Even weddings and festivals had to be carefully subdued. Drumming or lively dancing could bring fines or public shaming. A town without laughter is a heavy place, and you can feel that weight pressing down here. Of course, people found ways to rebel. Secret gatherings took place in forests or behind closed doors, where music and laughter could flow freely away from the watchful eyes of the law. Imagine a group of villagers sneaking out at night, carrying fiddles and mugs of ale, their faces lighting up as they dance barefoot in the dark. It's almost comforting to know that no law, however strict, can truly kill the human need for joy. We emerge from the alley into a small courtyard where a single lantern burns low. The air is still, and you can hear the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Standing here, you realize how much these laws were about control, not just of behavior, but of spirit. By banning laughter, rulers and moral authorities tried to create a society that was obedient, subdued, and serious. But they underestimated how stubbornly joy survives. We leave the courtyard behind, our footsteps echoing lightly as we head down another path. Ahead, a bell tower looms against the night sky, its silhouette sharp and imposing. Time itself was another thing that rulers once tried to control. Curfews, odd calendars, and bizarre rules about clocks made timekeeping a surprisingly complicated affair. And that's where we're headed next, into the strange world where even time could be illegal. The bell tower looms above us as we enter an era when time itself wasn't something you could take for granted. Today, we glance at our phones or watches without thinking. But centuries ago, knowing the time, or worse, telling it incorrectly, could be risky. Imagine living in a world where a misjudged hour might mean punishment, and where rulers treated time as a tool of power rather than a neutral part of life. The air here is crisp, the night sky clear enough to reveal a scattering of stars. The bell tolls softly, its sound carrying through the streets like a slow heartbeat. We're in a small European town, perhaps in the 14th or 15th century, where timekeeping is done by the church bells not by personal clocks. Most people can't afford anything as fancy as a watch, and mechanical clocks are rare treasures reserved for wealthy merchants or monasteries. If you wanted to know the time, you listened for the bell, and the bell was always right. To argue with the bell was to argue with both the church and the local authorities. We stroll past a clock tower that looks ancient and slightly crooked. The massive gears inside groan as they turn, their movements deliberate and slow. The clock is treated almost like a sacred object, guarded and maintained by a single keeper of time, a man who could face serious consequences if the mechanism failed. Imagine the pressure of knowing that if you miscalculated the hours, a whole town might accuse you of throwing their lives into chaos. Festivals, markets, prayers, all of it depended on those chimes. But this isn't just about telling the time correctly. In many towns, there were curfew laws that dictated exactly when people had to be indoors. The tolling of the evening bell wasn't just marking time, it was warning you to get home. If you were caught wandering the streets after curfew, you could be fined, arrested, or worse. The night watch patrolled with lanterns, and the sound of their boots on the cobblestones was a signal that it was time to vanish into your house or risk trouble. We walked down a narrow street, the faint glow of lanterns casting long shadows across the stone walls. You can smell damp hay and smoke from the nearby hearths, but the streets themselves are silent. The curfew has already started. A lone figure hurries past us, head down, muttering something about being late. He glances nervously toward a watchman at the corner, who gives him a look sharp enough to freeze him in place. And then there's the calendar. If you think modern timekeeping is complicated, imagine living in 1582 when the Gregorian calendar was introduced. Some countries simply skipped 10 days to realign their dates. People went to bed on October 4th and woke up on October 15th. Imagine how disorienting that would feel, as though a week of your life had simply evaporated overnight. Some towns even rioted because they believed they had been robbed of time. There were petitions demanding the return of the missing days, as though the king could just hand them back like misplaced coins. We pause near a small clockmaker's shop. The window is filled with gears, springs, and delicate tools. Inside, an elderly man is hunched over a wooden workbench, adjusting the face of a pocket watch. It's worth more than most people will see in a year. He notices us, nods briefly, and returns to his work, because time, quite literally, is money. There were even laws about who could own clocks. In some cities, common people weren't allowed to have personal timepieces, because it was believed they didn't need to control their own time. That was for the wealthy, the clergy, or the nobility. Everyone else lived by the communal rhythm of the bells. It's hard not to imagine the frustration of a farmer who wanted to wake up early but had to wait for the church bell to tell him when morning officially began. We step away from the shop, the street curving gently toward a quieter part of town. The stars above shimmer faintly, as though time itself is ticking away in silence. It's strange to think of time as something you could regulate with fines and laws, but to those who lived here, it made sense. Time was power, and whoever controlled it, controlled life. Ahead, the street opens into a square where bolts of dyed fabric hang from wooden racks, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The colors are bright blues, purples, deep reds, but even these come with rules. Our next stop will take us into the world of forbidden colors and patterns, where even the shade of your tunic could determine your fate. The square is quiet, but the colors seem to hum with their own energy. Bolts of fabric hang from racks under the weak glow of lanterns, crimson silks, deep indigo linens, pale gold wool, each one whispering a story of wealth, social standing, And, oddly enough, law. You wouldn't think that a color could land someone in trouble, but history has a way of turning even the smallest things into rules. Welcome to the world of forbidden colors, where the wrong shade of cloth could cost you money, your reputation, or even your freedom. We wander past a merchant's stall, where rolls of velvet gleam under the lantern light. The merchant watches us carefully, his eyes sharp and suspicious. You can almost hear him mutter, "Don't touch that purple cloth if you can't afford the law that comes with it." Purple, as we know, has long been a royal color. In ancient Rome, only the emperor could wear a toga with a stripe of Tyrian purple, a dye so rare and costly that it was worth its weight in gold. Anyone else caught flaunting that color risked severe punishment, sometimes even death, all because of a color. We step closer to a bolt of cloth dyed a deep, rich blue. The scent of the dye is faint but sharp, mixed with the earthy smell of wet wood and the faint smoke from nearby chimneys. In medieval Europe, dyes like this were expensive, often imported from faraway lands. Laws, known as sumptuary laws, dictated who could wear which colors. Bright reds and vivid greens were reserved for the wealthy. If you were a commoner and dared to wear something too striking, you might be accused of pretending to be above your station. It wasn't just about social order. These laws were also a way to protect local industries and control trade. Certain dyes were so costly that only the wealthiest could afford them, and rulers wanted to make sure it stayed that way. Picture a farmer's wife who saves for months to buy a dress with a splash of scarlet trim, only to be fined because her outfit is too noble. It's not just unfair, it's downright absurd. We pass a small workshop where a dyer is stirring a vat of dark liquid. The smell of fermented plants and minerals thick in the air. His hands are stained with colors that will never fully wash out. He gives us a wary glance, as though afraid we'll ask for something he can't legally sell to just anyone. There's a quiet tension in places like this, the constant balancing act of creating beauty that not everyone is allowed to wear. And then there are patterns. Stripes, embroidery, and certain woven designs were sometimes reserved for the rich. In Renaissance Italy, even the cut of your clothes could get you in trouble. A simple tailor could face fines for making garments with too much flair for a client who wasn't highborn. Imagine being arrested because your sleeves were puffier than the law allowed. It sounds like the plot of a bizarre comedy, but it was real. As we move through the square, the colors seem to glow brighter against the dark night sky. There's something mesmerizing about them, a reminder of how much humans have always loved to decorate themselves, even when the law said no. You can almost imagine a rebellious merchant's daughter sneaking into her father's shop to cut a piece of forbidden silk, just for the thrill of wearing it once. We stop near a fountain where the water reflects streaks of lantern light. The square is empty now, but you can feel the weight of history in the fabrics around us. These laws, as silly as they seem, were about more than clothes. They were about power, control, and making sure everyone stayed in their assigned place. The rich could flaunt their wealth in vivid color, while the poor were stuck with dull browns and grays. Of course, some people found ways to cheat the system. They would line their clothes with forbidden colors, hiding them just enough to avoid notice. Or they bribed dyers to sneak a little extra pigment into their fabrics. It was risky, but the desire to stand out has always been stronger than fear of a fine. We step away from the square, leaving the vivid bolts of cloth behind. Ahead, there's a faint sound, not bells, not footsteps, but singing. It's coming from a nearby tavern, where someone is brave enough to hum a tune, even though, in some parts of history, that simple act would have been illegal. The faint singing drifts through the cool night air as we approach a narrow street lined with low wooden buildings. The tune is soft, almost mournful, but it carries just enough to make you pause. There's something both rebellious and fragile in the sound, because in certain times and places, singing in public, especially after dark, could get you fined, arrested, or even dragged before a magistrate for disturbing the peace. We follow the sound to a small tavern tucked between two leaning houses. Its sign, a crude wooden board with a faded painting of a mug, swings gently in the breeze. Through the windows, you can see the flicker of firelight and the shadows of people moving. The smell of ale and roasted onions wafts through the air, but it's the singing that pulls you closer. A single voice hums a tune, low and steady, like someone trying not to be overheard. And yet, if the local authorities walked by, that song might be considered illegal. In 19th century London, there were laws that prohibited singing, shouting, or using any musical instrument in the streets during certain hours, particularly at night. The idea was to prevent public nuisance, but the enforcement was often heavy-handed. Street musicians could be fined simply for playing a violin too loudly, and drunken singing outside taverns could lead to a night in the cells. You can almost imagine a group of rowdy sailors belting out a sea shanty, only to be interrupted by a constable wagging his finger and writing them a ticket. We step inside the tavern now, and the warmth hits like a wave. The air is thick with smoke and the scent of spilt beer. Wooden tables are crammed together, and a few men sit hunched over mugs, their faces flushed. A woman at the back is humming softly, barely audible over the creak of floorboards and the occasional crackle of the fire. You can feel the tension in her song, as if she's weighing the risk of being too loud. Singing is a joy, but here it has to be careful joy. It wasn't just London. In Switzerland, for example, there were cantons that forbade singing or playing music on Sundays, claiming it was inappropriate for a day of rest. Even whistling in the streets could be considered offensive to the Sabbath. Imagine walking home with a cheerful tune stuck in your head, whistling mindlessly, only to have someone glare at you and say, "That'll be a fine." As we sit down at a corner table, a man nearby starts tapping a rhythm on the wooden surface. The bartender throws him a sharp look. You can almost hear the unspoken warning. Don't start something that'll get us all in trouble. It's a strange atmosphere, a room full of people who want to laugh and sing, but who have to keep their happiness muted, like a candle flame shielded from the wind. But the strangest singing laws were often tied to politics. In the Soviet Union, certain songs were banned outright because they were considered counter-revolutionary or decadent. A simple melody could be seen as a threat to the state. There are stories of musicians being arrested for singing songs that criticized the government, or for performing Western music. Imagine humming a Beatles song and getting interrogated for it. We leave the tavern and step back into the quiet street. The night feels heavier now, as though the silence is enforced. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, but no one sings. You can feel how oppressive it must have been to live under rules like these. Music is such a natural part of life, a way to celebrate, mourn, or simply pass the time, but these laws tried to strip that away. And yet, people always found a way. Secret gatherings in barns or cellars, where songs were whispered and instruments played softly, became small acts of rebellion. It's comforting to know that no law could ever fully silence the human urge to sing. We turn a corner and find ourselves facing a tall clock tower, its dark silhouette looming against the moon. The passage of time is steady, indifferent, and somehow reassuring. The night is cool and still. As we walk away from the quiet tavern, our footsteps echoing faintly against the cobblestones. The air smells of damp wood and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, You can hear the faint sound of a violin being played, softly, hesitantly, like a secret. It reminds you that creativity, like joy, has often been something that people have fought to express. History is full of strange laws, not just about clothes or food, but about the very acts of performance, dancing, acting, even storytelling. All of these have, at one point or another, been considered suspicious. We enter a wide square now, the kind where markets are held during the day. Tonight, it's empty except for a single wooden stage, battered and worn, with a few ragged banners swaying in the breeze. You can almost picture the crowds that once gathered here, listening to traveling musicians or watching plays. But there were times when such gatherings were considered dangerous, even illegal. In 16th century England, for example, laws were passed to restrict public performances because they were believed to spread disease and moral corruption. Imagine wanting to watch a comedy, only to have the performance shut down by a royal decree because the laughter might encourage sinful behavior. We walk across the square, the wooden boards of the stage creaking underfoot. You can still feel the energy of the past here, the excitement of people gathering for a story, the sound of drums and flutes. Yet, in the wrong era, this simple act of entertainment could be a crime. Actors were sometimes treated with suspicion, viewed as vagabonds who caused trouble wherever they went. In some cities, laws required performers to obtain special licenses to perform, and without one, they risked arrest. Picture a group of actors hurriedly packing up their costumes at the first sign of an official marching through the streets. Dancing, too, was often controlled. In Puritan New England, for example, laws were written to ban frivolous dancing, which essentially meant any dancing that looked fun. Even in Europe, certain towns had strict rules about dancing in public places, claiming it could lead to drunkenness or disorder. You can almost imagine a group of teenagers centuries ago, sneaking off to a barn to dance quietly in the dark, the way someone today might sneak off to break curfew. The rules might change, but the spirit of rebellion stays the same. We leave the square and step into a side street, its walls plastered with faded posters. The paper is brittle under your fingertips, flaking away to reveal layers of older advertisements beneath. One of them announces a traveling puppet show, though you can tell from the date that it was posted years ago. Puppet shows, believe it or not, were also subject to strange laws in some parts of Europe because they were considered politically subversive. A clever puppeteer could mock the king or the church without directly showing his own face, and that was enough to make the authorities nervous. The street narrows and twists, leading us toward a small courtyard with a single lantern glowing faintly. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet that feels almost intentional, as though the past itself is pausing to listen. Standing here, you can feel how much these laws reveal about the people who made them. Fear of chaos, fear of rebellion, fear of joy, it all comes down to control. Whether it was hats, shoes, songs, or dances, the strangest laws often tried to regulate the things that made life vibrant. We take one final step back and look at the path we've walked tonight. We've seen absurd rules about pineapples and beards, hats and shoes, ducks and singing. We've walked through centuries of human oddity, each law telling its own story about who we were and what we feared. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that while the laws themselves are strange, the people behind them weren't so different from us. They wanted order, meaning, and a sense of control in a chaotic world. It just so happens they thought the best way to do that was to measure shoe points and find people for whistling. The lantern in the courtyard flickers, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. The night air is cool and still, and there's a quiet sense of peace now. We've reached the end of our journey through the weirdest laws in history. All that's left is to take a deep breath, let the strangeness settle, and allow the calm of the night to carry you into rest. Take a slow breath, feeling the cool night air on your skin. Exhale gently and let your shoulders drop. There is nothing left to do, nowhere to go. Just the quiet rhythm of your own breath and the steady heartbeat of time, rolling on like the soft toll of a bell in the distance. Imagine yourself walking through a quiet courtyard, the moonlight silvering the stones. Each step is slower than the last, each sound softer, until the world seems to hush entirely. You find a wooden bench under an old tree, its branches swaying gently above you. The leaves rustle with a sound like distant whispers, lulling you deeper into calm. All around, the strange laws and stories we've explored tonight dissolve into a comfortable haze. The absurdity of it all, the hat rules, the pineapple taxes, the bans on laughter, fades into something warm and harmless, like distant dreams. Let yourself sink into that quiet. Your body feels heavier now, relaxed, supported. The night is gentle, the world is safe, and sleep is coming for you like the slow, steady roll of mist over the ground, wrapping you in stillness. Sleep well and good night.